We have been warned about it. In fact, we have even been put under a one-year observation period in October 2021. And finally, it happened. South Africa has been grey-listed. And this happened at the same month when we had the SONA and the budget speech. So we've had the SONA, we've had the budget speech, and then the grey listing. What exactly does this mean for the country? Is it really doom and gloom? Or there are opportunities for us to seize? As Albert Einstein said, in the middle of difficulty lies an opportunity. What does then it mean for us as the risk professionals and the risk profession? How do we ensure that our organizations are prepared for the year ahead? How is the year ahead even looking like? Ladies and gentlemen, rise and shine, great rising, top of the morning, and good morning to you, and welcome to our first webinar of the year. We are super delighted to share this morning with you as we unpack this very interesting topic and mostly answering the questions that are all in our minds and that are actually going to help us navigate through the current uncertainties and the challenges that our country is facing. Huge appreciation to the IRMSA team, to the IRMSA board, to our organizers, our facilitator, and also the panelists. It is then inevitable that the business leaders and risk professionals need to respond quickly to ensure that our organizations are prepared for what lies ahead. For risk professionals, we need to continue creating value of risk management and build resilience muscle. Come with us as IRMSA. As IRMSA embarks on this journey in 2023 of being limitless, we are actually limitless when it comes to serving and supporting you, our members. As risk professionals and profession, we are limitless when it comes to exploiting opportunities, supporting and preparing our organizations for the road ahead. We are limitless when it comes to contributing and seeking solutions for our country. And this webinar is just an indication of that. And actually, we've got quite a lot of initiatives that we've planned for the year ahead. Very exciting. That includes the breakfast roadshows that will be happening in April. And we just cannot wait to see you guys in person here in Johannesburg, in Durban, and also in Cape Town. There will also be the launch of the 2023 risk report in June. And we also continue with our collaboration, international collaboration with IRMSA, which is the International Federation of Risk and Insurance Associations. And we are indeed preparing for the international conference late in the year. With this being said, and before I get all carried away, let's get on to this exciting business of the day as I hand over to Jeremy Max, who is our trusted partner as IRMSA, a highly experienced media specialist with expertise in television, in radio, and in print. Jeremy recently co-founded Bold, a strategy and reputation management enterprise under Brave Group. Max has served as a presenter of the international hit show called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And he has held various media management positions, including editor-in-chief of ENCA and editor of Radio 702's Eyewitness News. And he writes for Financial Mail and edits at Focus, the publication's annual review. Jeremy has worked, I'm sure we all know Jeremy, he has worked with SAFM and Power 98.7 and won Best Current Affairs Program at the 2017 Liberty Radio Awards for his show, The Power Update. Jeremy is a best-selling author, an accomplished public speaker, conference facilitator, and media coach, and recently published his memoir, My Final Answer with Pen Macmillan. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm handing you over to Jeremy. Jeremy, we welcome you.
Chairperson, thank you very much indeed. Tabili, those are very kind and warm words of welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, ahead of this event today, I, over the past couple of days, have been counting the number of times in news bulletins, on radio and on television, that the words precipice and abyss were used. And I gave up after 30. That we face tough times is not up for debate in this webinar today. The question is, how as risk professionals do you respond? And what does the risk landscape look like currently for South Africa, if in fact it can be accurately determined, given the fluidity and the flux that exists at the moment? So I would contend that the idea today is not to point out fault lines. We know them. We need to talk about risk management and its role in fixing South Africa. It's how to equip the risk community with a practical to-do list by contextualizing events like the State of the Nation address, Thabile, that you mentioned, the budget, and you started your introduction with the concerns around grey listing. And the panel that I will introduce you to a little bit later will reference those as we try to put together a workable blueprint for 2023. But I think it's good to start with an overview. If I can use a metaphor for just a moment to take you onto the bridge of the ship, so to speak, and let's take a close look at the radar screen. And I want to introduce to you not only a close friend of mine and someone that I respect hugely and immeasurably, but he's also one of the country's foremost political writers and commentators. And what I like about this person is he will hit hard and punch hard when he has to, but he also understands the importance of solutions and also being measured and not to be not to be hypersensitive about issues. So let's start this important session today with that overview. And Justice Malala, it is so good to see you, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Jeremy, thanks so much for having me. Hello, everyone. Good morning, all. Thank you, Thabile. Thank you, Jeremy, again for those kind words. It's good to be here. I'm going to share some slides, if that's possible. Hope I can do that. There you go. I think one of the things that we do in South Africa is that we talk about things, we discuss them, we have webinars about them and so forth. I want to be a little bit controversial today and say that perhaps we don't do enough about the issues that face us. I'm saying this because how long have people like Thabile, Jeremy, myself, some of the members of the panel who are going to discuss later on, talked about the very same issues that we talk about. Jeremy, congratulations on your new memoir. 10 years ago, you interviewed me, and one of the issues that we talked about, and that was for my book at the time called We Have Now Begun Our Descent. Now, at that time, we were talking about many of the same issues that we face today. Many of the issues that are buffeting our businesses right now. And yet, did we do enough to say, it can't go on like this? We need to get to a point where things are on a turnaround and so forth and so forth. I'm not sure. And I think that is why today, I think we're not in a crisis. To the point Jeremy made about the counting of the number of times that the words like crises are used, shambles are used. We are in a polycrisis, and that a polycrisis is that it's multifaceted. It comes at us from this angle and that angle, and it's all over. And I think it's born of the fact that we haven't raised the issues enough, the issues of incompetence, of corruption, and so forth and so forth. So our polycrisis is not it's almost that it's deliberate, that we sat and allowed the corruption and the lack of care to continue, and here we are today. Thabile spoke, and I think it's crucial, about the grey listing. Now, that's been on the warning radar from risk professionals, from country risk professionals for years. And here we are, and the best we can do is say, oh, you know, at least we are expecting it and so forth. Well, we've been expecting it for 4 years. That's enough time to put in place the legislation and so forth to mitigate against these things. So I just want to say that today I'm sitting in the Fair Cape. I have load shedding going on. I have a little inverter in my home. So when the load shedding hit, the inverter came on, and then at 8:30 it went bust. So I had to run and come to my friend's house to join you in this webinar. And so it's one of those, you start thinking, well, did I do enough? Did I say enough back in 2007? Did I say enough back in 2012 when all this was happening and so forth and so forth? I think that's part of the reason why we are here today. My talk today is not going to be long. I'm going to be short, and I'm going to try to be as direct as possible. One of the things about what we're going through right now, I believe, is because there was a point when and Thabile and many of the IRMSA family, you know, about 12 years ago, 15 years ago, when serious work was being done about risk in South Africa, you know, we spoke about these things, but for example, people in business and other walks of life didn't say enough, didn't stand up enough. But we've reached a point now where people like the CEO of MTN are now speaking out and saying, look, precipice is the word that Jeremy used. And again, people are saying, we're getting close. The warning lights, it's no longer Jeremy. It's no longer just Thabile just saying it. It encompasses the whole society. And this, for me, is key, that we have to do something at this point, or else really all these words will come true. And this is particular to Eskom, to electricity generation, the fact that I have to run from my house because I have two failures: the failure of the state in providing electricity, my own inverter not working, and packing up in the middle of me preparing for this talk, and then a failure that we don't do anything about this right now. So the possibility of a generalized failure of Eskom and a grid collapse and blackouts generally is a real and present one. Anyone who says to you or to me that, oh, you're being a hypochondriac about this needs to then ask me and explain to me why we are in constant stage 4, stage 5, stage 6 load shedding as we speak. There isn't a day in 2023 that we haven't had load shedding, and for me that speaks to the crisis that we find ourselves in as a country, that we have allowed this to come to this point, and it's possible that it can happen further. And the consequences are huge, they're dire. We saw Q4 economic growth, or rather contraction of 1.3%. The prognosis going into this year is basically that we face an economic meltdown if we don't get the electricity situation back on track. And at the rate we've gone into this year, we're in March already, mid-March, and we are essentially operating on 3 bouts of blackouts every day, everywhere in the country. that means that we will see a contraction. And the consequences of that on a society that's already looking at all kinds of shocks will be significant. Political scandals that continue to oil the president, and the uncertainty that brings, because every time you see the president, you say, well, what if the public protector has said, well, he's not liable, but the parliamentary report has said he's got a case to answer, and then another report comes along. Remember, there are 7 agencies that are looking at the issue of Phala-Phala. One of them could be the one that forces the president to step down, and if he steps down, then we have political changes that loom. And are those positive or negative? What are their impacts? So that continues to hang over the country. And I think that leads to one of the key things that happens in these things. It's that you have business and consumer confidence essentially in the doldrums, in the toilet, because people keep on saying, well, what's next? And what next doesn't look good? What next looks a bit dire? And that leads to all sorts of consequences. Do I put my money into the economy? Do I hold back? Do I wait? What happens next? And so forth. All these questions are real risk questions. The issue we don't even talk about in South Africa is the fact that the floods in KwaZulu-Natal, what do they tell us? The drought in Port Elizabeth, in Gqeberha and surrounds, what does that tell us? The drought just a few years back in the Western Cape and Day Zero and so forth, all these things have an impact and say something to us. And all these are part of the polycrisis that we're facing now. Thabile started off rightly so by talking about grade listing. There are other elements of this polycrisis that are here today. Collapsing infrastructure. We could go on and on and on about infrastructure that doesn't work, from train stations to potholes to all sorts of infrastructure that doesn't work. And in the background, there's the July 2021 riots and what they say, the pandemic and the corruption that came with that, the uncertainty around leadership, and so forth and so forth. So this is the scale of it. But the scale of it, the key thing here is to realize that it's not just Justice Malala writing in an obscure magazine. It's not Jeremy writing in the Financial Mail, speaking to people like yourselves, 10,000 business leaders and business and curious business people. The rest of South Africa now realizes and speaks to the fact that we are in this crisis. And so the key thing to talk about is something that none of us in the room can do anything about. We can say a few things, we can raise our voices, but it's political will. If there's political will to fix Eskom, and this is for me the key thing in your radar, if there's will to fix Eskom, then you can your hand can move towards the positive. If you believe that the president, his cabinet, the key people he has appointed, the Minister of Electricity and so forth, that there is will to fix this problem, and the will is not to political it's not connected to political. I apologize. I think I have people speaking in my ear. So apologies if I stop and start a bit there. But if there is political will, then there will be a positive trend that may emerge. If there is no political will, and I say this again, I cannot force President Ramaphosa to have political will. None of the fantastic people on this webinar in this room can force President Ramaphosa or the powers that be to show and demonstrate the political will to change things. And so it is for us to keep an eye on, to view this and to make decisions as and when. But political will is central, because political will lead to, for example, at Eskom, not just appointing a new CEO, not just appointing a minister of electricity, not just having a new board. It will mean saying there is corruption and there is crimes happening every day at Eskom, sabotage of Eskom and so forth. This is a law enforcement issue. Send in the intelligence services, send in the police, send in the army to guard that key infrastructure and sort out the problem. So we can say a whole bunch of things about this is how to fix Eskom. Why aren't you fixing the basic things? We've heard from the outgoing or the outgone Eskom CEO that there is corruption. We've read in the Daily Maverick and other publications that there are intelligence reports that say there is corruption, deep-seated corruption. Why isn't anything being done? And so political will, for me, is something that will become central in the coming year in South Africa. If it's there, then perhaps we have a chance. If we continue to see the lack of political will to fix these problems, particularly Eskom, then I think we have a discussion for the panelists after this. I just want to point out that there is a sense that we are under siege in South Africa, and that is true. I also want to say that there are big changes taking place globally and here at home. And why they're taking place is because my view is that we are in the middle of a transition that is happening and is affecting us both here at home and in the rest of the world. That transition in South Africa is inside the ANC. The ANC post-1994 adopted a liberal constitutional framework. People like Cyril Ramaphosa and others are essentially liberal constitutionalists. There is a big battle inside the ANC about the utility of that liberal constitutionalism. People are increasingly saying, well, it hasn't worked. We need some sort of benevolent dictatorship. Look at how Singapore turn things around. Look at how Rwanda is doing, and so forth. And there is a push. So there isn't consensus about what we need to rise up. My view is simply that there's nothing to blame about the Constitution. You've got to show political will. You've got to do within the constraints of what we have, what can be done. But there's a transition happening there, and we may see some changes in the future around this. But the fact that the ANC, which has been in power for so long, is not settled about what we are and where we are, it's part of that. We have a transition in society, and that transition emanates from the fact that the ANC is essentially on its way out, or on the way towards not being the dominant player in South African politics. The ANC's own polling last year showed that the ANC would only get 38% of the vote if the vote had taken place back then in July, August 2022. So you can imagine every other player in the political sphere wants a bit of the action, wants to be a player, and the key question now, and I'll talk to this a little bit later, is what happens post-2024 election. Globally, people like me, 1989 happened, the Berlin Wall comes down, a new liberal international order is in place, and it's all, oh, globalization is here. Jeremy and I have an idea. We get it manufactured in China, we send it all over the world, and it's all fine. Well, you think about the relationship between China and the USA right now, it's extremely frosty. The relationship between China and Russia, Putin is saying, well, that was a mistake. 1989 was a mistake, and Russia has been humiliated. and now it's going to come back and so forth. And so you have these massive global tensions playing out across the world, and the US, supporting Ukraine on the one hand, and trying to push off China, trying to put a ban on TikTok, for example, and so forth. So the 1989 consensus, as it were, is coming to an end, and the tensions are ratcheting up all over the world. In Europe, they are closing down the borders. The UK, for example, voted for Brexit, essentially saying we don't want this globalized marriage with Europe, we'll stay on our own. You look at Italy, you look at Germany, both of them voting for a conservative, ultra-conservative government. So there's a big change that is essentially part of the changes that are happening after 30 years of a liberal world order, and it's coming to an end, and we don't know what's coming next. And so that for me means that instability is part of where we'll be, whether here in South Africa, across the globe. These are uncertain times, times that may presage great discomfort for all of us in the world. So it's just what pertains. We are here now, and I think the key thing as risk professionals like yourselves is the response and arming oneself for what I believe are constrained times ahead, because largely the leadership that we need, whether here or in many parts of the world, is not quite present yet. But of course, in crisis, there's always opportunity, and I hope we can see it and we can find it. I think politically now, over the next year, Thabile said very convincingly that what does the year hold for us? And for me, there is one big trend, and that trend is the fact that someone like me, born under apartheid, you spend your whole life obsessing about the system of apartheid. You have 1994 happening, and then it's the ANC in power, and the ANC holds the dreams and hopes of ordinary people, of business people, of so many South Africans in its hands. And the ANC is in power in 1994, 1999, 2004, and continues to be in power. But there is only so much that the liberation dividend, the fact that, the ANC was the key player in the fight against apartheid and that it dominated government for 30 years. It's 30 years now since the ANC came to power. It came to power at 62%, was at its most popular at 68% when Thabo Mbeki was the president in 2004. It's now, if the 2021 elections were held, were a barometer for national elections, the ANC is at 47.9%. At 48%, the ANC basically is below dominance of our political sphere. If other players all came together, you'd have a coalition government in place. The ANC's biggest draw card in 2019 was Cyril Ramaphosa. In 2014, it was, oh, Cyril is coming when Jacob Zuma leaves. Cyril Ramaphosa now has his own major scandals, has his own troubles to deal with. And so essentially the ANC is left with its liberation dividend, the fact that it is seen and was perceived as the party that liberated Black South Africans in particular, South Africans in general. It's now tainted. And this shows in polls like the Ipsos poll, where the ANC only got 42% last year. 38% in its own internal polling, and a lucky 50 to 52% in the National Research Foundation polling that was done in November towards the end of last year. So essentially, South Africa is without doubt looking at coalition politics next year. Now, all of you in the room have been following, like so many of us, the key issues that have come up in coalitions across the country. Coalitions are hard work, and we are discovering that. They're hard work because you have personalities, you have interests, you have financial interests, you have all kinds of issues that come up, and the least among those issues is always the people of the country. So you have political interests always at the forefront, and that is what has led to the toughness of coalitions everywhere, and coalitions in this country in particular. So today, many of you may know, Bantu Holomisa of the UDM, other opposition leaders are meeting here in Cape Town to discuss the shape of coalitions next year if they come up. I think that is to be welcomed, because part of what has happened with our coalitions is lack of preparation for what exactly a coalition means and how it plays out in a municipality or even at provincial level. And next year, without a shadow of doubt, we will be faced, even if at national level, the ANC gets 51, 52%, as the NRF projects. At provincial level, in a province like Gauteng, for example, there is, in my mind, and from all the polling that has been done, Gauteng will be a battleground, and there will be a coalition government in place after the provincial elections next May. And so you're likely to see the ANC looking to form some form of government with other people, or the opposition saying, let's do something. But the experience of the city of Joburg, the city of Tshwane, the city of Ekurhuleni, what is happening in KwaZulu-Natal now with the 13 municipalities where the EFF and the IFP were working together. What happened in Nelson Mandela Bay over the past, not just the past few months, but over since 2016. All these experiences tell us that these are huge areas of instability, and so the coming of if you will, coalitions will lead to more political noise than we've seen, and there will need to be some maturity, some serious hard discussions about what does a marriage look like and what does it achieve. Those conversations will have to be had, and be had in a very straightforward manner. This is an issue that's come up recently again and again. I've said this before, and I've said it at IRMSA, that our future and part of the political landscape in South Africa cannot ignore Julius Malema and his centrality in our politics. Julius Malema, a reputation that over the past 10 years as leader of the EFF, as they celebrated their 10th anniversary, that they flip-flop and so forth and so forth. All that legitimate criticism of the party. But the key thing is this: the EFF is now a 10% party and maybe heading towards 13%. Its own internal polling showing that it's got support among young people. It needs to get them out to vote, and it may go to 13, 14%. If it does, and the ANC takes a big hit, and the ANC needs a coalition partner, say in Gauteng, if it has 38% and needs one big chunk, then it means that it will, the EFF will be able to say, well, these are my 5 pillars or my 7 pillars of governance, whether it's building a state bank, expropriation without compensation. This is a real possibility now in our political landscape. Many people have pointed out that Julius Malema and parts of the ANC, particularly the ANC in Gauteng, are very close, and they're already forging alliances at a municipal level. If you look at what's been happening in the city of Joburg and the city of Ekurhuleni and so forth and so forth. So this will be the key thing to watch, where the ANC in particular goes with its coalition building, and whether it's with the EFF, and what impact an EFF coalition with the ANC has on ANC policy. Because right now, ANC policy has been pretty much middle of the road, and a tie-up with the EFF would mean a drastic change, in my view, of ANC policy. There are other configurations. The ANC could go into coalition with the DA, but with the DA going into coalition with the ANC, given that the ANC would most probably swallow it up, because if the DA goes in and says, I'll reform the ANC, can the ANC allow itself to be reformed by the DA? Most unlikely. Some in the DA have said, yes, we've got to do it, but most in the DA have said that is political suicide. So that is something to look forward to next year. We have some institutions that are excellent in South Africa. The reason why we don't talk about the IEC is because the IEC has done a great job since 1994 of running our elections. It must do the same in 2024. So this is an institution that I personally will be keeping an eye on. Many of you in the room, have followed very closely the July 2021 riots. I have done the same. I believe this is a major risk. The fact that so many in intelligence services, so many in a security cluster didn't see it, couldn't do anything about it for days on end, is a real concern. And my view is that we need to do something about this before things happen again. I believe this could happen again. I honestly, truly believe that July 7 conditions remain. The unemployment, the huge youth unemployment that persists in our country at more than 60% of youth unemployment continues to be in place. Now, young people are not thieves, are not going to burn down things and so forth. But when you have what we had in July 2021, where it's burn, many others say, well, what am I waiting for? I might as well grab myself a little something. And that escalates and continues, in fact, deepens the problems that you have. The enmity in the ANC, the divisions in the ANC, they're still there. They're playing out in court. Part of what happened in that week was the divisions of the ANC spilling out and affecting the rest of us in the country. The eruptions of xenophobic violence, violence around immigration issues and so forth, I think can be used just as the trucking issues were used to attack trucks on the N2 in July 2021. I think these kind of small eruptions all over the country, happening daily almost, could be used as a spark for what happened, for a repeat of what happened in July 2021. The last thing I wanted to talk about was trust in institutions. This is a major risk. Many of you have followed this. Afrobarometer brings out a survey every so often, and that survey looks at trust in public institutions. I think we are in trouble here. Trust in the police, 26% South Africans. Trust in local councils, only 24% of South Africans trust their local council. just look at this and see how our people have lost faith in virtually everything. Trust in the president of the country. This is before the Phala scandal, 38%. Electoral Commission, 36%. Parliament, only 28%. If there is no trust in these institutions, we see what we saw in 2021 with the local elections, where 40 million people were eligible to vote in South Africa, and only 12 million actually voted. If we have such institutional distrust, mistrust, how can we build anything? Because people look at us as leaders, as voices in South Africa and say, what are you talking about? And so forth and so forth. So for me, if we don't fix this trust deficit, then we are truly in trouble. I spoke about policy when I spoke about potential coalitions. If the ANC wins pretty much the same policy, if you want these policies to remain, if the ANC goes below 50%, it has to strike a deal to form a government, and that has its implications. A win by the DA or the EFF or a coalition between the two, then it's a new policy path. But what I'm saying is that the days of unalloyed ANC hegemony in our politics, those days are coming to an end in 2024. Just a few positives. I'm a big fan of the judiciary in this country. I think it's done very well in standing up against political machinations, political attempts to politically interfere in it, and so forth. And I think Judge President Zondo has done and spoken convincingly and persuasively about the judiciary's work and its job and upholding the Constitution. I think the Zondo Commission itself showed us and opened a window to what has been happening in our country for a long time, and I think that it did a sterling job. It is not the job of the judiciary to prosecute people. It is our job. It's jobs of the people, many people in the room who are in law enforcement, in prosecutorial services, and so forth. But if we keep this judiciary going, and as relatively trusted as it is right now, and continue to give it our support, I think this is a very positive thing. We need to build on these positives. The fact that we're seeing some of those named in the Zondo Commission reports appearing in court, being given a chance to clear their names, this is positive, and I hope that we get some convictions, we get people clearing their names, but these are the things we need to build on and can build on. The South African Revenue Service, I was interested in the fact that the Minister of Finance, Thabile, you spoke about SONA and the budget. When the budget was announced, there were no increases in corporate tax, no increases in personal income tax. We still continue to collect. I think one of this institution is one of those, that was captured in the 2010s, but it's back, and I think it could return to being what it used to be in the early 2000s. So these are some of the positives that I think we've had. Thabile didn't mention we had a cabinet reshuffle, a sort of cabinet reshuffle. In 2011, there was a cabinet reshuffle in South Africa. Fikile Mbalula received a call from one of the Gupta brothers saying, "Oh, congratulations, my man, you're going to be the sports minister." And Thabile, Fikile Mbalula was shocked. And he said, "Why am I receiving a call from a member of the public and not from the president of the country telling me about this reshuffle?" And I think it's a small win but actually we had a reshuffle, and we can blame the president. People like me, oh, this cabinet is too big, it's not good enough, and blah, you should have fired that one, and so forth. You know what? President Ramaphosa chose those people himself. He chose not to fire. He chose to fire, and I can blame him because he's the president of my country, and he has to account to all of us in the room. And so, for me, this is wonderful that we've had a cabinet reshuffle where the president actually reshuffles and not other people. Just to conclude, I would like to say it's a time of great despondency in South Africa, but I think just as we did in 2021 during the July riots, it's ordinary South Africans, it's people like yourselves in the room, it's business organizations, it's Business Leadership South Africa, BUSA, and others that speak up, ordinary citizens saying, I'm going to clean up my streets and my township. My mother gets her pension from the local shopping center. I'm not going to allow that to be raised down, to be looted. This is where my belief in South Africa resides. This is where my hope in South Africa resides. I think that we still have that, and I think that with that we can achieve a lot. So even in these very, very trying poly-crisis days, I think that we have a chance to do better, to build a better South Africa, and to cooperate and collaborate to do amazing things. Thank you so much. I appreciate being asked by you to come and speak to you. Thank you, Jeremy, for giving me the chance.
Justice Malala, thank you very much indeed. And as I predicted, there would be a little bit of light at the end of a very dark tunnel. You've given us so much to chew on, Justice. The future of democracy in this country within the ruling party, that challenge to liberal constitutionalism, of concern, the transition battle outside the ANC. You talk about a period of instability ahead, which is what we're going to talk about, and how risk managers can work around that. The diminishing trust deficit, the loss of faith, but it's through collegiality, I guess, that we're going to get this right. So Justice Malala, thank you very much indeed. At this point, I would like to introduce our august panel, and I will ask the panel members if they'll switch on their cameras and their microphones as I make the introduction. I'm also keeping a very close eye on the Q&A box in front of me, and I will do my best to try and weave in some of your comments and questions as and when they come. But first of all, let me introduce Dr. Ajiv Maharaj, who's the Deputy Head of Economic Development at the eThekwini Municipality. Ajiv, good morning to you and a very warm welcome. You're joined by Yvonne Motibi, who's the Chief Risk Officer at the Madibeng Local Municipality, along with Antonella de Cunha, Group Risk Manager at Capespan. Volker van Verden, welcome to you, Head of Strategic Risk at the consultancy Risconet, and also Vuyo Mafata, who is Managing Director of Marero Investments. So to all of you, a very warm welcome, and let's wade straight into it if we can. And I'm going to use as a starting point that word that Justice Malala used, dealing with the poly crisis. So I need to ask you, first of all, and this is an opening question to all of you, and in no particular order, Ajiv, I'll come to you first because you were at the top of the list. How has your thinking changed in terms of risk priority, in terms of risk management, when it comes to this poly crisis that we are dealing with right now? What's your thinking?
Thanks, Jeremy, and good morning to all of the participants. I think, from what we've seen, the government responds in crisis. We've seen it, whether it was in the 2010 World Cup, we see it at local government level, we see it at national government level, that when it comes to a crisis, this is, for some reason, this is when government starts to intervene. When communities start to protest on the road, then service delivery issues are addressed. When there's an electricity crisis, this is when government starts to put in place plans. And I think that's something that government really has to change. And it needs to change by getting the right people in positions and listening to the advice, listening to what all of this is saying. For example, the current trajectory that Eskom is on hasn't changed for a long time. It's been the same, but in 2020 we had a crisis, and there was legislation introduced which allowed municipalities to start to procure electricity independently. We saw some legislative relaxations, which was positive, and then everything seemed to be quiet. And now we're back in a crisis, and we have a Disaster Management Act, state of disaster declared, and there seems to be some traction in any case. I think the first thing is to move from crisis to be able to preempt and look at what's coming and plan better ahead. And just to touch on, I think, what happens at the national level is reflected at the local level. So everything Justice has spoken about at the national level is replicated at the local level. And if we just look at, for example, state infrastructure spending, state infrastructure spending has been on a downward trajectory for the last 7 years or so. And this is just not just the SOEs or national, it's reflected at provincial level, and it's reflected at municipal level. If you look at most of the metros in the country, spending on infrastructure has been on a downward trajectory, while spending on operational expenses have increased. And I think that's a critical problem, because that's talking about future challenges that we're going to have. Even if we overcome the current energy crisis, there's looming crisis in terms of distribution networks that have been damaged, water issues where we're not investing sufficiently. So I think that's just to put it in a little bit of context. But in terms of positives, I think there are some positives that are coming out. One, I think, like Winston Churchill said, never let a good crisis go to waste. There are some positives coming out of the energy crisis. And one of those is the reform agenda in terms of reforming state institutions, looking at other spheres of government. So there are a number of reforms that are happening, but I think principally the reforms need we need to look at where the strengths and weaknesses are of both government and the private sector. Government definitely has an important role to play in terms of regulation, in terms of setting the framework, the strong institutions, and in many ways owning some of the economic assets. But when it starts to operate businesses, this is where I think a lot of the problems start to lie. And, there really needs to be that separation to say business is the purview of business, and regulation and ownership of assets, yes, that's the role of government. If I just take, for example, the post office, if you look at the post office compared to PostNet, and how PostNet has grown because of the weaknesses in the way the post office is run. Post office running very much of an outdated model.
Right. Ajiv, I think your words on the post office are well received. I am going to take those as your opening remarks. I'm going to be very strict, unfortunately, in orchestrating time today, because we do have 4 other panel members and a fair amount to get through. But thank you very much indeed. I just want to reference something that Sherilyn Morland has just put on the chat group, saying plans, little implementation or execution. She goes on to say execution risk should be a dark red risk on the risk profile. We can talk about that a little bit later. Yvonne Motibi from the Madibeng local municipality, Chief Risk Officer, let me bring you into the conversation now. And in many ways, you sit right in the belly of all our frustrations, particularly when it comes to infrastructure and how often it fails. From a public sector perspective then, Yvonne, how are you thinking or managing the whole notion of risk in your particular preserve? Hello, Yvonne, are you hearing me?
Jeremy, good morning.
Good morning. Off you go.
Yeah. Well, in a municipal environment, Jeremy, we deal with a wide range of complexities on a daily basis, that is. I mean, we deal with food security issues to water shortage, if not flooding, electricity potholes, protests, to dealing with lions and buffaloes roaming on our streets. You know, so the kind of an environment is really a litmus test for agility and resilience, if not anti-fragility, because of the almost guaranteed change and uncertainty that plagues our space. And now we are speaking of the recent cabinet change and what really it means for us as municipalities. What direct bearing does it have on us? So by now we should already be mapping out plausible scenarios of how this is going to play out, you know, and how we expect this ministerial change to filter down to our sphere. And, you know, when it comes to infrastructural challenges, we sit with a plethora of challenges at local government, and the state of our aging infrastructure is diminishing daily. And meanwhile, we are not generating enough revenue to refurbish and reinvest in some of these. On the side, we are trying to see how best we can retain some of the investment that we've got. Some of our investors and businesses surrounding our space are relocating to international spaces where the conduciveness of the environment in which they operate is much better than which we are providing here in South Africa. So we are really dealing with a whole lot of challenges, and we find new ways every day of dealing with some of these challenges.
All right, Yvonne, thank you very much indeed. Antonella de Cunha, Group Risk Manager at Capespan. Yvonne rightly mentions agility and resilience when it comes to managing risk and the way in which her approach has changed. What's your view? How's your thinking changed, and what recommendations in terms of that big thinking can you give to the risk management community?
Morning, Jeremy, and good morning to our audience. Thank you for joining us, everyone. 422 and counting. Very excited to see you all online. So how does the agricultural sector respond to this agility? I think just by way of background, the trend in the agricultural sector is very different to the country trend. In 2020, we had a 13.4% growth. In 2021, 8.3%. The path ahead is a bit dubious, although we had exceptional growth in 2022. The path ahead dubious. Why? Because of Russia war, because of the energy crisis, because of compliance, ESG risks. Those are the kind of things that come up for the farmer on the ground. How does he respond? How do we take it forward? Yes? Oh, sorry, I heard someone in my ear. I beg your pardon. How do we respond? How do we become more agile? I think in the agricultural sector and looking at the trend, that's why we've been successful, because notwithstanding load shedding, notwithstanding increased input costs, labor disturbances, the fact that insurance has withdrawn so much from us, you know, public utility excluded, Political violence, excluded. Damage by power surge, excluded. So all of those things are now coming to roost on the farm, for lack of a better word, and the farmer is making it happen. I mean, from my experience, 1/3 of the potential profit that the business can make has gone into diesel to keep the lights running. Okay, why? Because when you harvest your apple in March, you only eat it next year in January. It's got to go into a cold room, which is called controlled atmosphere. If that cold room doesn't have 24/7, 365 cold air, we don't have apples in January. So the agility in the industry is enormous. It's wonderful to see how people have taken the risk and have evolved themselves to improve themselves.
Volker van Vin from Risconet, what our previous panel members have said is encouraging on the one hand, but very concerning on the other, and I'll tell you why. Conventional wisdom says that load shedding is costing the country 900 million, let's call it R1 billion a day. There have been some, we've seen, for instance, what the farming community has been doing in the Western Cape, as Antonella has just outlined for us. But the subtext to that, Volker, is that essentially business, it would appear, is on its own. As Antonella said, farmers are making it happen. In terms of risk management, is the business community now completely on its own, do you think? And if that's the case, what do they need to do in terms of managing risk?
Hi, Jimmy, and everybody attending. Answering specifically, I think business has always had to make its own plans. I think that on its own point is actually really where I wanted to make my principal comments. And if I can just run through a little context of what's already been presented, the poly crisis that leads to a sort of rabbits and headlights sense, we're all waiting for something to improve, like better load shedding. Well, we can't just wish for better load shedding. We actually have to do something about it. And I think one of our risks, you talk about business, is what I'd like to call the them risk. In other words, who's the they? The them risk. In other words, what about us? What do we do? So diving into quickly, if you do it from a risk practitioner's point of view, there are many models, but let's just run through, and I've got some suggestions. You've got unknown unknowns, known unknowns, unknown knowns, and known knowns. Those are the four. But if you look at them quickly in terms of this morning's conversations, the unknown unknowns would be the black swans. Now, at the moment, South Africa is going through the discount of uncertainty. So what we do as risk managers should be dealing with addressing the discount of uncertainty and inertia. And that can come through in a variety of ways through scenario planning. What are the known unknowns? Well, we've had a lot of those from Justice and other speakers. So we've got to start galvanizing independent action. We can actually do things ourselves. You ask the question, why are we on our own? Well, let's just get on with it ourselves, like the farmers and like others. So I think there are many independent and proactive people who do show what can be done. And I think a hidden gem is collaborative action. We have a lot of energy and money as business in the private sector. We can just address what we need. Let's just get on and do with it. The third one is unknown knowns, where again, we've got situations where we fear the unknown, but what about the issue of scenarios and then driving independent action again? And in terms of known knowns, well, what about new models? So the known known was OG Eskom. But what are the independent models? Well, if you go through them, what do we need? Electricity, water, logistics, health, and education. So in all of those, we've got opportunities to move to independent power generation, mini nuclear, gas in the industrial sectors. We can harvest water at source. We can change the logistics into corridors that are run on a private and park basis. The health sector can be replaced in the context of replacing clinics with private sector that does it at 1/10 of the cost of medical aids. And education's got to be changed to a digital tracking and delivery model. So those are simple things that can happen and change the dynamic. So risk management ultimately is about finding the new mitigations and facilitating that. We don't have a wish list and we don't walk on water, but we've got to change and facilitate the change of thinking. And I just wanted to give some of those examples.
All right. Volker, thank you very much. I'll get back to you in just a moment. Just for the audience that is with us today, And as Antonella said, so nice to see a huge group of risk professionals being part of this conversation. And I'm keeping a very close eye on that chat box and Q&A box as well. But I will always try in this conversation to bring it back to practical ideas and practical solutions for risk managers. We know what the problems are, and it's very easy for a conversation like this just to recycle what the problems are. Maybe it is cathartic, maybe it makes us feel a little bit better, but it's not driving towards solutions. So with that in mind, Vuyo Mafata, welcome to the conversation. And again, I would put the same question or a similar question to you about how your thinking has changed in terms of risk management. But building on what Volker van Werden said, I'm particularly interested to know what you think about harnessing more collaborative action, and in that way, coming up with new mitigation thinking. Where is your head right now?
Thanks, Jeremy, and good morning to everybody. Interesting question. Yvonne earlier spoke about agility. I think a lot of the issues that we're facing as a country, it's things that are known, and it's things that we've known for many years. So a lot of the things that we see are not new. The Allianz Insurance Group does a risk barometer report at the beginning of every year. And if you go and look at the report over the last 2 years, one of the things that you will see, the same top risks that CEOs of institutions in this country have highlighted as risks has remained the same. And one of the things that it tells me is that perhaps it's time that we change our approach to risk management, because the more things remain the same, the more things change. We were dealing with we were just on the brink of, after the announcement of South Africa's grey listing, as we were dealing with those issues, we also then came to realize that the electricity crisis in this country also has become an issue that is a disaster, for lack of a better word. And while risk professionals are dealing with that and assisting institutions and companies to be able to respond to some of those things, we get more and more bad economic news that impact on the economic environment. And what this tells me is that we need to be a bit more agile in how we then manage risks going forward. So the days of a standard risk register and then you taking the next 12 months to look at your risks and implementing the mitigating strategies is something that not necessarily may work in the current environment, because things change as we move. We had last week that S&P downgraded South Africa's economic outlook from positive to stable, just as we were recovering from the news of great listings, as well as the realization that power is going to be a crisis for a long time to come. Many of us were excited when we saw the budget speech and the Minister of Finance talking about incentives that sort of like tried to build in and bring in this element of collaboration, like private sector doing a bit for power generation, individuals themselves also doing a bit for power generation. And I'm sure most who went and updated their risks and saying this risk is no longer as high as we thought it would be because government is doing something. And then a few days later, you hear other institutions we've seen over the last 2 days, Salga, City of Joburg, also now criticizing some of the incentive schemes that have been brought forward in the budget, saying that this is going to bankrupt municipalities, right? So, so that's why I keep on talking about agility and agility with regards to how we then respond and how we manage risks that we face as institutions in South Africa. Thanks, Jeremy.
All right, let's thread that needle then a little bit more intensively if we can. And Dr. Ajiv Maharaj, let me bring you back into our conversation. Let me just remind our audience, the Deputy Head of Economic Development at the eThekwini Municipality in KZN. So Vuyo Mafata talks about building more agility when it comes to risk planning. What's your understanding of that?
I think, yeah, there needs to be more agility. There needs to also be, I think there's a need to focus on getting the basics right. within the cities, but nationally as well. Focusing on the basics, getting those to work effectively. And coming out of each of those risks, there are also opportunities. And for example, the energy crisis has resulted in the growth of a huge renewable energy sector. So F&B did they run a construction industry index, and it's come out very positive in certain aspects, in that subcontractors, particularly those focusing in the energy space, have seen a huge boom in sales. So that's one example where there's opportunity coming out of the risk. Another example is, we've had a young township business come to us, and because of the water crisis, they've put together put together an app that manages water levels in reservoirs, in truck tanks, and provides an integrated system where managers are able to manage water levels across the city. So, in each of those challenges, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. The problem is that local government is not flexible enough, and the legislation is not flexible enough to be able to respond to that. And I think that, going on the earlier speaker's comments, agility and being able to respond quickly is key.
Dr. Maharaj, help me understand what you mean about going back to basics when it comes to risk planning.
So I think, one of the challenges we've had at the municipality, for example, with the looting, the flooding, there's been a number of catastrophes. Instead of, for example, going out and trying to attract foreign direct investment, our focus has shifted into just getting the basics right at home. So forget about spending huge amounts on marketing the country and the city overseas. Let's put all of that in fixing the potholes. Let's get the energy issues resolved. Let's get the basics working before we look at all of the other issues. And I think that's where we as a municipality are at the moment.
Yvonne Matibi, back to you, Chief Risk Officer at the Madibeng local municipality. Do you share Dr. Maharaj's thinking? But I would imagine very difficult often when you're fighting that constant battle between lack of budget on the one hand and growing despair, despondency, and frustration on the other. How do you manage, Yvonne, the risk around that?
Yeah, a very good question, Jeremy. And I think this is very real. These are some of the experiences that we go through every day. And to put it into context, I think systems that we have in place, which are very good systems, I must say, these systems at the top of them led and implemented, executed by human beings. So taking it back to the people factor, some of the challenges that we really are facing is the wall that Justice spoke about, the leadership attitude towards making a difference. So for as long as we're still going to be battling around getting people to have the necessary will, the society as it is hungry for people who are going to bring about change. And enough about talking about plans. We need to start seeing action in place. And that action, it has to be led by someone who's going to come in and say, I want to see a difference in ordinary people's lives. What we're dealing with now is a whole of communities who cannot afford. We are dealing with Izinyokas, which is in essence tempering of electricity because people cannot afford. When we go around, for instance, in my space, to try and get to the root causes of why are we seeing an emergence of a skyrocketing rate of communities who are plugging that directly or through tampering into the electricity grid is because they cannot afford. So in as much as now we are currently looking into addressing load shedding in terms of availability of power to the people, we should not lose sight of the other eminent problems that we will always have, irrespective of the presence of power to the people or not, which is affordability, which is unemployment, which is inequality in society. So these are some of the real issues that we are dealing with. And that is in effect the major contributing factor to why we cannot afford as municipalities, because the major part of our customers, we are dealing with hundreds and thousands of customers, many of whom cannot afford our services. Nonetheless, we do have a constitutional obligation to provide these services, irrespective of whether they can pay or not. So this is a real challenge that then really puts us on a spotlight to think of alternative ways of raising revenue. And that's where we are now looking into attracting investment to create employment around the areas in which we operate, and finding inefficiencies in the manner in which we operationalize our plans in terms of, finding value for money and reducing the rate at which we provide services. Some of the issues are that you buy a pen which costs 10 rand, you buy it for 50 rand. And those are some of the inefficiencies which are crippling the system as it is. So we do look out for some of these red flags, and we communicate them instantly so that they can receive attention. Meanwhile, looking for a social compact. Social compact is another one, Jeremy. We need to start looking into working in the broader context of all stakeholders which are critical to service delivery and its value chain. And some of them are our ordinary citizens, which are laymen on the street. Those people, they need to be well educated in terms of looking and protecting our assets, public assets, because a grid which is going to be damaged and vandalized by a single person has a bigger effect on the broader community that relies on it for power provision. So these collaborations that we want to venture into with our communities will help us save a great deal and reduce unnecessary costs on the part of public spending.
All right, Yvonne, thank you very much indeed. So I want to pick up on that notion now of the social compact. Volker van Wirden from Risconet spoke a little earlier about harnessing collaborative action. Let's go to Antonella if we can. But Antonella, I'm keeping a close eye on the chat box. And Preetha Supul, thank you very much. I'm going to paraphrase something that you've just said. And I think this is very, very relevant in terms of Volker's idea of harnessing collective action. She says, this is Preetha, I think government and pseudo-government organizations are making themselves redundant. She goes on to say people have gotten tired of waiting for the government to govern and other governments and municipalities to do their jobs. They're already providing their own solutions. On the one hand, it's to be praised and lauded. On the other hand, it just gives an indication of where we find ourselves in the country right now. But having said that, Antonella, that harnessing of collaborative action or effort, bring it back to what your constituency, the farming community, is doing. How are they managing risk, I wonder, through better collaboration? Or as Yvonne talks about, that social compact?
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for that question. Yes, collaboration is essential in an export business, in an agricultural business, and certainly from a micro point of view, the farmer in Grabo or the farmer in Uppington has got the network of the neighborhoods, etc. Whether it's for crime or for load shedding, we work together. The problem is the collaborative approach and influence that we have with government. So one of the things that were mentioned earlier was the regulations and the lack of agility and lack of speed on regulations. Those of you that follow the agricultural industry, you know that we've got lots of hoops to jump through before we get the carton of apples or oranges into the European market or into any other market for that matter. And when those regulatory requirements are not met, it blocks us from exporting. And let's not forget the importance of exports in South Africa for the South African industry. There's 1 million people that are employed in the industry. the industry on its own is worth about 120 billion rand. So the collaboration with government means that we lobby continuously, lobbying with them. And if you look at the SONA, what did we ask them? We asked them specifically, please release some relief on the energy crisis, release some rebates on rates. They did come back with some of the things, for example, giving us better infrastructure promises, I should say. Whether those promises will become actions is a concern. The promises on the road degradation, the promises on the rail infrastructure, the promises on harbour and ports. We can't do that on our own. So what we do is we look at the private sector and support that. So, in the Port of Cape Town, there's a private provider, and then there's Transnet. So if you can use the private provider, you load on because you know your exports are going to leave. If you lose Transnet, then you've got load shedding and you've got other problems. But the collaboration, influencing, lobbying with government is essential in the export and the agricultural industry. And it does not go silent. We've got people that sit in government, both in South Africa and in Southern Africa, because we draw product from Southern Africa as an industry. And at the end, they all come through the Port of Cape Town or Durban. So if the road's not right, if the rail's not right, if the policy is not right, you're not going to get there. Jeremy, it's a polycrisis with a complex solution, not of one risk manager, but of everybody. Everybody around the table. The round table requires everybody to give their position, to deliberate, and to deliberately plan and execute the plan. And that plan is fluid. Today, Cape Town is closed because of the wind, so we've got to move to Kucha. Tomorrow, Kucha is closed because of labor. We've got to move back to Cape Town. So it's a fluid, ongoing plan. That's the only way we're going to export the billions of cartons of fruit from this country.
Antonella, thank you very much indeed. Volker van Witten, back to you, Head of Strategic Risk at Risconet. Let's bring in this whole concept of fluidity if we can. As Antonella rightly says, a polycrisis is going to be defined largely by the fluidity because things are changing all the time. How do risk managers find some consistency, if they can, among or within that environment of fluidity? It makes your jobs very, very difficult. Is there a starting point?
Hi, Jeremy. Yes, and one appreciates that people are trying to do a good job in the constraints that they have. I think the point about fluidity is probably one of the Achilles heels of risk responses in South Africa, because we are so good at marker plan. So what happens after that is that we miss the line in the sand of where we should have changed the strategic direction and influence of the risk solution. So if we can swap between one and another port or this or that, we keep doing that. And that actually is the boiled frog syndrome. What we forget maybe is that a new port or a new port solution is needed on a collaborative basis, if it is perhaps for agriculture or for coal or minerals or so forth. And what I think is, we talked about a trend analysis earlier and everyone getting depressed about the trends. Well, imagine if infrastructure and services are running at an optimal and low cost and reliable basis, and obviously driven by business. And that basis, you would have a secure solution for the next 5 or 10 years. The same applies to energy. What we need from a collaboration and a consistency basis is to make new bets in new solutions where we all co-invest in that environment and we know that it works for us. Now, yes, that it creates a parallel model because we know that the state's capacity is declining and will continue to decline irrespective of promises. And so the actual consistency is going to be achieved by new collaborative models that build service capacity in the sectors that need it.
How do you start that process, Volker?
You have a conversation. So there could be the Chamber of Commerce of Roslyn or Vanderbijl Park and say, what do we need? We need power. How do you make power? New gas turbine. What does it cost? 2 billion. When can we have it? 9 months' time. Hello, sign up here. Let's go. Where do you plug it in? The same substation as Eskom is using. 12 and 15 months later, you've got reliable power. I mean, what's the problem? So, in the context of not running an industrial node at full capacity, those are relatively easy things to do. The same happens to water and, as I said, health and education. There are significant pipelines of talent and health that we should be creating as a dividend to South Africa, instead of just waiting for something better, like national health, which is going to, really be a struggle. So I'm aware of models where we can provide private patient care at 70 Rand per consultation instead of 700 Rand. Those solutions are out there. And that, if you look at the terrible problem of people waiting days in clinics versus a 70 Rand solution, these are real things that can happen in a collaborative environment.
All right. Volker, thank you very much indeed. Voyo Mafata, back to you if I can. And let me play devil's advocate for just a moment. I fully appreciate and understand what or the importance of harnessing collective action is concerned. There's no doubt about that. But I would also suggest for you the flip side to Volker's argument is that so many organizations, desperate organizations, margin poor organizations, are so focused on their own survival that they simply don't have the wherewithal, the time, the inclination, or the confidence to engage in any sort of collaborative effort because they have a payroll to meet.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. So that's one of the things that everybody needs to realize, is that the days of maximizing shareholder value at the expense of everything else around the ecosystem within which the business exists are over. Right? Our problems are real, and if we're going to have a view of only focusing on what I need to benefit as a business and what I need to do on my side to make sure that there is continuity, you may be able to succeed in doing so, but you may not have a community to consume your product or a community to consume the service that you render. So in the solutions that we need to come up with, I don't see how collaboration cannot be a part of strategy of any business around how do we make sure that we work with those that are within the communities within which our businesses operate. Government being one of them, community being one of them, labor itself also being one of them. So it's a quick recipe for the end if we're going to ignore collaboration.
I agree with you, but that's also predicated on compromise and empathetic leadership, which seems to be in deficit at the moment.
And it becomes a vicious cycle. Yvonne earlier on was talking about some of the challenges that the infrastructure faces in the municipalities, right? So if you look at the socioeconomic issues we have in this country, high unemployment, high youth unemployment, Justice spoke about it earlier on, right? If interventions that we're going to come up with would ignore the realities and we don't look at the root causes of some of these things. So what causes a young person to go and destroy infrastructure, to go and bridge electricity and so on, right? It's unemployment and so on. So if some of our solutions we don't look at, so as risk professionals, some of your role, I would assume, is that you need to be able to be advisors to your excos, right? Around what are the solutions that the excos should put on the table to addressing the root causes of the risks that your institutions face. And crime, destruction of property and so on is a root cause of something, right? Youth unemployment could be one of those issues, right? So what are we doing in our own supply chains to make sure that we contribute towards employment creation? Right? So in OECD countries, the SME sector employs almost close to about 60 to 70% of people in this country. We only have about 28% of people employed in the SME sector, right? So if we're to address the unemployment issues, we then need to look at the SME sector's capability to assist with employment creation and look at how do we then do in our own plans as institutions, make sure that we help those along to address some of these issues. Thanks, Jeremy.
Voya, thank you very much indeed. Dr. Maharaj, let me return to you then, and let's briefly develop this notion of how risk management needs to push and promote the notion of better, more effective, better measured, I would imagine, collaboration within the eThekwini municipality in KZN. I'm assuming that you would buy into the concept. Where would the obstacles be? Dr. Maharaj, that question was directed at you.
Sorry, Jeremy, I didn't catch the last part of your question.
The question is if there is general consensus that a more collaborative approach to risk mitigation is needed, and I think that there would be universal consensus on that. Where are the fault lines? Where are the obstacles? What are your experiences in that respect that you could share with our risk community that's with us today?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think apart from being within the municipality, I also serve on the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So I've got that kind of view from both sides. And I think certainly from the business perspective, there's a great willingness to partner with the city, also in addressing some of the infrastructure challenges. And I think increasingly we're seeing that there's an important role that partnerships need to play in infrastructure delivery, particularly around bulk infrastructure. The city's local government doesn't have the funding to be able to fund bulk infrastructure for the economy to grow. Business, on the other hand, can come in and play a role, but you know, the question is how do they recoup their investments? So there are a number of mechanisms that are being pursued. One of those is the PPP model, the public-private sector partnership model, and you know, the problem with that model has been that it's really been a complex legislative environment to work in. And in the budget speech, the minister did talk about re-looking at that model and having a task force in place to streamline the process for public-private partnerships. But notwithstanding that, I think we've also seen other partnerships emerging in the energy space. So the municipality has put together its integrated resource plan and a plan for becoming independent of Eskom, and there's significant steps along that roadmap. And part of that is working very closely with the private sector to be able to procure independent power. So we're looking at 2025 for the first batch of projects to become operational, and by 2026 we should have, as a city, gone off Eskom's grid by 40%. So basically, load shedding stages 1 to 4 would have been negated in eThekwini within the next 3 years. So that's part of the plans. But I think part of the challenge is also that the private sector and government comes from different perspectives. Government is a highly regulated space. To be able to make partnerships work is a very lengthy process. And hence you see implementation takes a long time, and often you know, we experience a lot of plans and not enough implementation.
Dr. Maharaj, I've got a very close eye on the clock, and we've got about 5 minutes left on the webinar. So I'm going to come back to you for a very quick closing remark. And my question to you will be the same to the rest of our panel members as well. And maybe this will give us the list of 1 or 2 items for the risk management constituency to consider over the next couple of days. In terms of rethinking the approach, given the overview that Justice Malala gave us, given the conversation that we've had about more collaboration, for instance, what, in your opinion, Dr. Maharaj, then is the new call to action? What would you be exhorting risk managers to do in these very difficult times, in this time of poly crisis?
So I think from the perspective of both the city and the business within the city. I think collaboration is the key in terms of managing risk. We saw that during the unrest. The collaboration between business and government started to happen a lot closer. There were a lot of failures on the ground, but playing a role with business, with government and civil society coming together, I think that played an important role in moving things forward. And I think in the future for infrastructure provision, the future for addressing a lot of our challenges is creating those enabling frameworks where government, business, and civil society can work together in a constructive manner.
Dr. Maharaj, thank you very much indeed. Dr. Ajiv Maharaj, Deputy Head Economic Development at the eThekwini Municipality. Absolutely concur about enabling that environment. But obviously, as so many of our audience have said today, the time for talk is over as long as they're enabled very, very quickly. Yvonne Motibi, Chief Risk Officer at Madibeng's local municipality. What, ma'am, is your call to action then? How should risk managers be changing their approach in this time of poly-crisis?
Thanks, Jeremy. Well, I think one of the things that I would, at the foremost, highlight is we should start to acknowledge that as individuals and as business and risk managers, we form part of a whole. So there is no government without us individually. And I think it's about time that we start making it our business. What shape and form is the future of this country going to take? We start talking about it around the boardroom table. We start writing about it in our social media spaces to influence individuals within our spaces, but also to advocate for a risk management-based decision-making. So it's about making it our business, and really that is at the crux of thinking about taking action and immediate action at the time that you are called to do it.
Yvonne, thank you very much indeed. Antonella Dacuna, Group Risk Manager, Capespan. Same question to you. Where should the heads of risk managers be right now in this time of poly-crisis?
Hi, Jeremy. So the theme is the same, I think, for me as well. This poly-crisis requires a collaborative, boundless, public-private approach. There is no way that we can do it on our own. Recovery and resilience is going to be very challenging, and we choose our response. I think that's so important. There might be 17 responses, but we need to focus on the responses and have the opportunity of agility to move away from certain responses if that door closes. So as risk managers, make sure that you have the boundless approach, shape the landscape, and assist management and the board to deliberately know how to manage their risks and measure those risks. I wish government would measure their risks more often on a monthly basis, because then they would know where we're tracking and trending. But I think in the private sector, that's how we're doing it.
Antonella, thank you very much indeed. Those comments of yours tell me just how important the discipline of risk management has become at this time. I guess the challenge that you face now, and perhaps have faced for some time, but now more urgent than ever, is to develop a much louder, much more strident voice to get that message across, to talk about things like agility and cooperation and enabling those partnerships. Volker van Verden from Riskonet, same question to you.
Hi, Jeremy. The theme and acknowledging what's been said again is the context. Perhaps what's happened is we've forgotten what good looks like. So what does the ideal look like? Why are we operating on the basis of what I call the snapshot? And moaning about stage 4, that's the snapshot, that's where we are today. What good looks like is zero load shedding, good water, good health, good education, good social communities and investments and so forth. And so the underpin in terms of risk management is scenario planning to see what the upside looks like. And we forget the upside, I think, in the context. We're solving so many problems under risk management that we aren't always pivoting and saying, what is the ideal? Because risk is also the loss of the opportunity of achieving the ideal. And we can achieve those ideals if we take charge of our environments and we say, what does good look like? And we then address those known knowns and the controllables, as I mentioned earlier. There's a lot of space in South Africa to achieve some great stuff. And instead of just optimizing around the current impediments and constraints. So to me, scenario planning and going for what good looks like is a really important idea generation, and then commitment. And then you use collaboration to get all your friends around and achieve the good.
You're absolutely right, Volker. We've become so mired in gloom, haven't we, that we've forgotten what good looks like. Talking to someone the other day who was absolutely delighted, thrilled, celebrating the fact that we'd been reduced to stage 3 blackouts, which is ridiculous. We've forgotten what good looks like. Vuyo Mafata, I'll give you the final word. Volker, thank you.
Thank you. So government cannot do this alone. So risk professionals, I think one of the things we need to encourage the use of private capital to collaborate on key issues, right? To address some of the challenges that we as a business are facing. And I think number 2, the adoption of an agile risk management process. Things are changing on the day, and we need to make sure that we're on top of the changes and make sure that the businesses are able to respond to the challenges that they're facing on a daily basis. Thanks.
Vuyo, thank you very much indeed. I've certainly learned 3 important things here today. One is the necessity to become a lot more agile. The second is this harnessing effectively the power of collaboration, providing it can be effectively done and measured properly. And then, as Volker van Widnes just said, focusing on the bigger, brighter picture, which I think is absolutely critical. To all our panel members this morning, thank you to all 5 of you. And in conclusion, as we wrap this session up, and I hope there will be many more to come this year, the Acting Chief Executive Officer of IRMSA, Christopher Palm, over to you.
So good morning, and thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to everybody in the room. Yeah, that's a very interesting introduction. Thank you so much. And I just wanted to say I'm wearing 2 hats. So for now, I'll just be talking to you as the Chief Risk Advisor. I've got some really, I suppose, like always, controversial thoughts around how do we respond to this morning's keynote, as well as to the panel members and all the points that they've raised. So I've got some thoughts around that. And then, of course, Jeremy, just allow me to also close then in my role as caretaker of IRMSA to close this morning's webinar. So thank you so much. I would like to just kick off. And I want to highlight, out of the conversations that we have and listening to Justice Malala as well as our panel members, I want to put on the radar, I want to do 2 things. The first thing, I want to put on the radar what I think you should be doing tomorrow morning, maybe even this afternoon. If you haven't done them already, I would like to share 4 thoughts around those. And then, I mean, Volker, you could have done the closing just in that 1 sentence. Antonella, the same, Vuyo, Yvonne. You all spoke about what I believe the future risk management should look like. And of course, I will be, like I said, controversial. Some of them would sound like tongue-in-cheek, but they absolutely not, because I think if we carry on the way with that we do, then next year when we invite Justice Malala, he'll accuse us of the same thing. Lots of talk, very little action. But let me kick off. So there are 4 things that I really want you to consider, and I'm here talking very specifically about risks that you should have on your radar. on your profile, really. And if you don't, then I would expect you to very quickly do an assessment and get this on there. The first thing that came out in the conversation that we wrote a risk chat about not too long ago is our political positioning or our lack of clear foreign policy as far as our relationship with Russia and with China goes. So why am I raising this? There will be a global viewpoint taken at some point around the war in Russia, the tensions between Russia and China, and South Africa will be expected to make a very clear, concise, or taking up a position in that regard. And in the absence of that, I do believe that all the organizations represented this morning, there will be a repercussion. Now, whether it's the same as a blackout or our global loss of confidence, our consumer loss of confidence, irrespective of the cause of that, whether it's, like I say, whether it's the lack of taking a very solid political position, whether it is because we can't offload our ships in our ports, our infrastructure, it doesn't really matter. The impact of this will be on the confidence, whether it's your consumer, whether it is your service provider confidence, but there will be a global repercussion for us. And we need to understand what is our position in our country, what is our position on our continent, what is our position in the globe, how does it affect our products and our services, how does it affect our cost structure, our revenue streams, and how would we already start positioning ourselves in that regard. So that is something that I think we are underestimating, and I would like to put it on the radar. Then also, it was spoken to and it was spoken about, but not as directly as I want to put it. And it has become clear. Now, please do not misunderstand me when I say that the way that this was done, I do not want to get into that conversation. But the fact that I believe our country is looking very differently at the concept of whistleblowing and at whistleblowers instead of acting in response to what was said and rather investigating the credibility, the origins, and the extensiveness of the allegations. I would like to put onto the radar is what is your organization's stance against the principle of whistleblowing? And then, of course, how do we respond to whistleblowing, the person and the content? And I think that is something that we need to for sure consider, because that in itself for me is a huge opportunity, linking up with Volker, huge opportunity to allow us to implement effective control when it comes to addressing pervasive and systemic fraud and corruption. So I want us to consider that from a chief risk officer or from a risk practitioner, risk professional point of view. Then I want to talk about the scenario planning around becoming a nation of, or that will be led by coalition. Justice spoke about that. I think now is already the time. It may even be a little bit late. 2024 is around the corner. What does this mean for us? What does it mean for our organizational leadership, our positioning in, like, again, the country, and then, of course, products, services, and all of those good things. And of course, we don't know what it will turn out to be. And therefore, I recommend that we start having conversations around scenarios on what the permutations could be and how would that impact us, so that, back to the word agility that was used quite a bit, so that we are agile as the political landscape unfolds. So that's the third one that I really wanted us to consider and add into the conversation that you will have with your board, with the risk information that you take to the board. And the last one, I must say, I was asked since the time I resigned from Eskom, I was always asked, what is the possibility of a blackout? And I would always defend the possibility of a blackout, because that is the worst thing that can happen to our country if one understands how a blackout will impact our entire country. Now, I need to say this. We need to start considering the possibility of a blackout. That it is a hell of a lot more likely than it was 2 or 3 years ago. So having said that, the current business continuity management plans that you may have in place, please go back and reassess them. Those plans predominantly were built on a downtime of up to about 4 hours with an 8-hour gap in between, and your risk response strategies would respond to that. If you speak to Vodacom, you speak to MTN, you speak to our telecommunications network, anybody that uses alternative sources of energy, even if they are renewable or otherwise, we have to challenge our existing business continuity plans in light of what I like to refer to, instead of a blackout, extended periods of outage, meaning that you are going outside of the window of current technology and what current technology allows you to run off the network, but also to restore the energy potential of that alternative supply. So how long can our batteries last? How long does it take for them to charge? And what are the intervals of increased load shedding, and how does that affect our business continuity plans? So with that, I just wanted to put those 4 that I've picked up out of our conversation. I would really invite you to go and check the effectiveness of those controls within an extended load shedding environment. Now, onto what I think would be a little bit contentious. Contentious will imply that it's bad, but it's not. I think enough of the panel members today, as a matter of fact, every single one of the 5 has in any or in some way, shape or form spoken about what I just want to highlight. So my first point is Justice Malala called us out, and we've been called out before. We've been called out by the minister then that spoke at one of IRMSA's conferences, Pravin Gordhan. He said, we talk and we don't do. Justice this morning says, we talk and we don't do. And of course it is true, because I went back right here in my office and I looked at all the last 9 of our 9th on its way, of our risk reports. And since 2017, we've been talking electricity, we've been talking water, we've been talking infrastructure, fraud and corruption, we've been talking the lot, social unrest, social disobedience. Now, of course, on the scale of increasing impact and likelihood, it started low, and it's I think it was Volker that spoke about the frog in the water syndrome. And of course, now we are where we are. So what is my view as the Chief Risk Advisor of IRMSA? What is it that I think we should do to move from just talking about things to doing something differently? And it lies in not just the risk management process in isolation. I think by design, that is flawed. I think it doesn't allow us, and I want to quote, I've made a note here, and it was, I think, Yvonne that said, it is making it about our business. And so for that reason, I would invite you to go back to the revised or the new IRMSA integrated guideline on strategy, risk, and resilience. So this is my point. If we are going to take or move from just reporting on risk to making a difference or to take action, or like Volker said, to know what good looks like, then we're going to have to do a couple of adjustments. First, we have to make sure that risk assessments are linked to not just the execution of strategy, but to the setting of strategy. I think so. If we are going to stop talking and doing, let's get the right strategies. Secondly, we need to do risk assessments against the execution of that strategy. So in essence, we've robustly tested our direction, and we are now robustly testing our ability to execute. Now, together with that, we need to then link our risk, and this is a question to everybody in the room. Are your risk profiles linked to your strategy, and are they linked to the key performance indicators? So in essence, have you brought in risk appetite and tolerance? Are they talking to your key performance indicators? And then to understand whether or not we are holding people responsible and accountable as part of the risk management process, because that is where we fall flat to bring talking about stuff to actually making a difference. And that is where we hold our risk owners, our control owners, we hold them responsible, we hold them accountable. Whether that is for good and or bad performance, that's not the point. The point is we report to the board, we report to EXCO, but we focus not on whether or not the actions that we've identified to change a risk, being both a threat and an opportunity, that we're not focusing on that. And that is the one thing that I would like to put on the table. We need to make sure, we need to go back and review the way we do risk management so that we have those difficult conversations. Once we've understood a risk, once we've said that this is our position in appetite, this is what we're doing about the risk, let's hold people responsible for that within your governance structure. So that was my first one on what I think we should do differently to bring action to the talk, is we need to hold people accountable. And of course, when I say accountable, it's not just a negative thing. Let's pay people bonuses if they've done the right thing. You know, let's do that. Let's reward. But also, let's have the blood on the wall conversation. Let's bring out the unvarnished truth so that we can ensure that action is taken. Then the second thing that I want to talk about, back to the point of the new IRMSA guideline, is in my mind, I don't have the answer yet, but I am asking myself the question, does agility equate to resilience? Does agility equate to resilience? Now, let me ask you why I asked the question. The example was used. Again, I think it was Voyo. It could have been, no. It was Dr. Ajiv, I think, that spoke about post office, postnet. Personal point of view, Eskom will go exactly that same route. So in the absence of decent service from the post office, we had alternatives. We had a different view on what good looks like, back to Volker's point. We then built alternative solutions. We built Postnet, we built FedEx, we built the courier guy, we built Checkers 66. We've built things to replace something that we were hugely dependent on for so many years. And how and why did we manage to get that? Because we looked at the problem very differently. What does good look like versus needing to fix the existing problem? And we always say that the problems of the future will not be solved by the controls of the past. So in that lies the meeting of minds with Volker and with Yvonne when they talk about how would this look differently. So I believe Eskom will move exactly the same way. We will find alternative solutions for our problems because we will change the risk conversation. And that is where I would like to just leave you with my last thought. I am reading quite a bit on the global radar about let's chuck the risk dashboard out, let's not use the word risk. And in all of that, my takeaway is the following. We need to change the conversation when we speak about risk. We need to integrate the strategy, like I said, both the setting and the achievement. We need to understand the risk, and I'm going to come back to this conversation. And then we have to ask ourselves, so what happens if it goes wrong? What alternative options or futures do we have? Which in essence brings me back to the question that I asked about agility. Does that give us agility? Does already having alternatives or alternative strategies, alternative solutions, does that mean we are building agility? Because it for sure means we are building resilience. So I will still sort that out for myself. But the conversation has to change. The conversation has to move away from worrying about our current challenge and what the threats are about that to talking about what does good look like and why don't we pursue looking at the opportunities. So when we look at our current risk register, please, I'm challenging you to go look at your causes. Your causes will be a blackout. Your causes will be stage 3, stage 4. Your causes will be all of those good things, which sit in the realm of a threat, which is external environment, which you can't do anything about. So we need to change the risk management conversation to rather asking, how can we solve the problem? What are the opportunities for us in this particular risk that we are facing? And then ask the question, and so what happens if it goes wrong? And build response strategies for that. So I'm suggesting, and this is not tongue-in-cheek, read the new IRMSA guideline, swing the conversation around, rather have the risk conversation about what are the opportunities in addressing this risk, this threat, and then ask and answer the question, and so what happens if we can't get this? And what do we have to have in place? Because the conversation that way around allows us to already consider strategy, to reconsider strategy, reconfirm strategy, understand the opportunities, and then ask and answer the agility or the resilience question. So what happens if it goes wrong? What do we need to have in place? Can we change tack very quickly? And what are the alternative futures that we can then pursue? So I wanted to just leave that as food for thought, things that I've picked up out of our panel, Jeremy. And this all then comes back to the point that I wanted to make around collaboration. If we change the conversation from wanting to manage, wanting to control the external environment, the O&T of the SWOT analysis, and we rather focus on our S's and W's. So what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses, and who can we collaborate with to build the postnet, to build the FedEx, to build the solution in as far as the courier guy goes, the alternative energy sources. It was such a good example. I think it was Volker that used Vanderbilt Park and said, so what is it going to cost us to generate our own solution? Not what is the risk of a level 4 or what is the risk of Eskom not coming back on, because we can't do anything about that. And if we persist in having the conversation around risk, focusing on the negative, we will not make a difference. Justice Malala will tell us no action a year from now. If we change that conversation and we say, what is the solution? What are the opportunities for us? And can we pursue that? I believe we will make a fundamental difference, not just in our organization, not just in our industry, but in our country. And I think that's where I will leave you with as far as my thoughts on this morning's panel and the keynote speaker goes. Jeremy?
Chris, thank you very much indeed. And I think at this point, we can safely wrap up the conversation. Once again, to you, Chris, thanks for those closing remarks, to the panel members themselves, and obviously to all of you who have participated. It's our fervent wish that you walk away with some practical thoughts, and we have something, I believe, of a long weekend coming up. So perhaps you could apply your mind to some of the very valuable insights that our panel members have left with us today. I thought, Chris, with your permission, I might leave us with a quote from Arnold Schwarzenegger. But
can I ask,
before that,
yeah, can I ask you to do that, because I know the quote, it's a marvelous one. I lie, I don't. I just wanted to thank you. Just a couple of thanks, please, Jeremy,
yeah,
if you don't mind. For sure, you know, in line with our theme for 2023 and IRMSA historically, and it won't change going into the future. We always have really catchy, really practical themes, and the theme for 2023 is limitless. And just, you know, if I look at today, 422 odd registrations, we nearly had 300 people in the room attending this morning. For me, that's limitless. And the reason why it's limitless is because IRMSA is still great. IRMSA wants to support its members. And so, you know, putting this together, Tabile spoke about our upcoming roadshows, some more webinars, before the end of June, our upcoming AGM and the risk report. So lots of limitless potential, lots of limitless value propositions that we'll have before the mid-year. But Jeremy, you know, like always, thank you so much for hosting our webinars. There's absolutely not an opportunity that we offer you that you turn down. So really appreciated. And then, of course, your hub, Gillian, Roxanne, and the team. And then our new appointment in IRMSA, our events manager, Zine Somi. So just to say thank you for a great session this morning and putting this again together seamlessly. And similarly, Justice, thank you so much. I mean, from wherever he is in the world, this time around in Cape Town, other times all over the globe, thank you so much for always supporting us. Really appreciate that. And then Dr. Maharaj, Yvonne, Antonella Volker, and of course then Vuyo, thank you for all your inputs and your time that you've shared with us so practically and of course so insightful. Always appreciate that. And then of course to our members and our guests, in case you haven't seen it, we've made this a free webinar for both IRMSA members and non-members. So to all of you, thank you so much. And I trust that you have taken away some nuggets of excellence, some risk intelligence, and of course then some learnings. Even if you oppose those learnings, at least it'll get you thinking. So with that, let's stay limitless. Let's pursue all of these activities and thoughts and thought leadership. And I appreciate your time. Thanks, Jeremy, and back to you.
Thank you, Chris. The IRMSA events team has just reminded me to tell you to watch out for the post-event email, the recording and the survey for us to get your valuable feedback as soon as possible. So this is what Arnold Schwarzenegger said. Strength doesn't come from winning. Struggles develop your strengths when you go through hardships, as we're doing right now, and decide not to surrender. That is strength. To every single person who's participated in this call today, I wish you strength. Thank you and goodbye.